This is Racing Tough. Benny Parsons and Brett Bodine take you on auto racing's toughest driving challenge. Benny Parsons, a former Winston Cup champion and Daytona 500 winner, is now an award-winning analyst for ESPN. Brett Bodine drives the Quaker State King Racing Buick, a winner in NASCAR's Modified, Grand National, and Winston Cup divisions. Racing Tough also features Kenny Bernstein, world champion drag racer and owner of the King Racing team, Larry McReynolds, crew chief for the Quaker State Buick, and Tough Facts with ESPN's Dr. Jerry Punch.
One Tough Motor Oil announces one tough guarantee. The Quaker State 250,000-mile or 10-year guarantee. Register your new car at a participating service center. Then use only Quaker State. Have oil and filter changed as directed at a service center, and if any lubricated engine part suffers an oil-related breakdown within 250,000 miles or 10 years, you're covered. Quaker State guarantees it in writing. The big Q is one Tough Motor Oil.
The white flag is out for Brett Bodine, but here comes Darrell Waltrip. He is charging and now has clear racetrack between himself and Bodine. There's the separation between the two. Can Brett Bodine hold on for his first Winston Cup win? Here he comes off the fourth corner. He's going to do it. Brett Bodine wins the first Union 400. Look at the crew celebrate.
Brett, there's nothing better than watching auto racing to get me excited.
There's only one thing better, Benny, and that's driving in a race, especially when you win, like our Quaker State Buick team did at North Wilkesboro.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be on both sides of the camera, and for the next few minutes, we'll have the opportunity to share a little bit about the sport we both love so well, and let the fans at home in on some of the things that drivers and teams do to make our sport so special. We'll ask some tough questions along the way, and let you at home test your knowledge to see if you can pass the Quaker State Racing Tough Challenge.
Benny, I'm sure we'll both learn something along the way and have some fun while we're learning.
It will be fun, so let's get going. Many times as we describe the action on the track, we'll use terms we're familiar with, but sometimes aren't clear to the folks at home. The terms may refer to something special the teams do to find more speed on the racetrack.
Probably one set of terms I get asked more than any other is what does it mean when a car is pushing or loose?
That sounds like a cue to me for our first question on the Quaker State Racing Tough Challenge. When a car is loose, it means A, the rear end doesn't want to follow the front. B, the front end wants to head to the wall. C, the tires are mismatched. Question 2, when a car is pushing, it means A, the rear end wants to slide towards the wall. B, the front end doesn't want to turn properly. C, the gear ratio is too low. Those are the first two questions on the Racing Tough Challenge. Brett, what are the correct answers?
Well, Benny, for question 1, the correct answer is A. As we look at this diagram, we see the natural arc of a curve that we would see on most oval tracks. If a car is loose, the rear end would want to slide towards the wall. It's almost like driving a passenger car on snow or ice.
Well, Brett, I know for question 2, the answer is B. Why?
Well, as you can see on the diagram, the front of the car wants to head towards the wall.
Well, folks relate that to driving a passenger car on a gravel road. Have you ever tried to turn the car and the tires slide through the gravel? That's pushing.
And you can imagine how that feels in a race car.
Okay, so that's loose and pushing. Brett, what can we do to fix it?
Wait a minute, Benny. Don't get ahead of me. We're going to answer that question later.
Okay, while we're talking about handling, let's once and for all explain the difference in a front steer and a rear steer race car.
Okay, let's go to Charlotte, North Carolina, to the Quaker State Buick shops for an inside look at front steer and rear steer difference.
Brett, we often hear the term front steer, rear steer. What are we talking about?
Well, Benny, with the Quaker State Buick, we are distinctively running all front steer cars. And what we mean by a front steer car, with the steering box being located and all the linkage that goes along with the steering, the center link and the tie rod ends are all ahead of the cross member or ahead of the ball joints in the car.
Okay, Brett, now you've explained to us the mechanical difference. What's the difference in driving the two variations?
With the front steer car, the car is much more stable as it enters the corner. A tighter feel, more secure feeling for the driver. Whereas with the rear steer car, freed up and a loose feeling is what the driver feels. We use only the front steer type car with the Quaker State Buick because we're looking for consistency throughout the season at all the racetracks.
Is there some racetrack that would put you at a disadvantage?
Well, there are some teams right now running rear steer and front steer combinations depending on the racetrack. But that's just basically a team preference and driver preference of what he wants out of his race car at each particular racetrack.
At most tracks, handling is the key to victory, while at others the key is horsepower. At Daytona and Talladega, NASCAR has placed restrictor plates on the cars to reduce the horsepower. And that's the subject of this ESPN Tough Fact with Dr. Jerry Punch.
A couple of years ago, NASCAR legislated the use of the restrictor plate at racetracks like Talladega and Daytona. The purpose was to slow speeds. But what this plate does is restrict airflow into the intake of the engine, thus lowering horsepower and subsequently lowering the overall speed. A lot of crews tried to overcome this plate by increasing the cowl pressure or increasing airflow through these small holes, hoping by speeding up the air, you could get back the horsepower you lost. Well, they've learned with literally hundreds of hours of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars with this dynamometer here in the shops that you really don't want to speed up the airflow. Actually, you want to slow it down. So they've built inserts that go underneath the plates to actually slow the air even more and direct the air, making the engine more efficient. Much like a race driver would find on a road course. After going to school, he learns that sometimes you must slow down to go faster. This dynamometer has taught the crew chiefs and engine builders the same thing about restrictor plate horsepower.
The restrictor plate has slowed the cars down, but with an engine builder like we have on the Quaker State team, it won't keep us slowed down long.
Well, Jerry mentioned in his Tough Fact, the restrictor plate was used to reduce engine horsepower. Now, Brett, how much horsepower does the Quaker State Buick V8 have?
That's a question I can answer, but let's ask the folks at home. It'll be question 3 of the Racing Tough Challenge. A normal, unrestricted Winston Cup engine would produce how much horsepower?
Okay, folks, here are your choices. A is 400 horsepower, B, 550 horsepower, or C, 610 horsepower.
Okay, Benny, while we're at it, how about an average passenger car?
That'll be question 4. And since we're talking about the Quaker State Buick Regal, let's look at the horsepower for the V6 in a stock Buick Regal passenger car.
Without a turbocharger, the Buick 3.1-liter V6 engine would produce A, 135 horsepower, B, 190 horsepower, or C, 225 horsepower.
Okay, Brett, let's go back to the shops for the answers. A Buick Regal off the showroom floor has a V6 of 135 horsepower. Brett, you've got a V8. How much horsepower do you have?
Benny, our V8 engines in our Quaker State Buick are about 630 to 650 horsepower.
Wow, that's over 4 times as much horsepower as a stock car. There's got to be some awfully strong components in this engine.
It certainly does have some strong components, but probably the strongest of all is the Quaker State motor oil that we put in. The same motor oil you can buy off the shelf and put in your passenger car.
In 1989, this King Racing team won the Sears Die Hard Award for the most miles completed in the 1989 Winston Cup season.
That's just one more proof that Quaker State is one tough motor oil.
So, folks, the answer to question 3 was C, 610 horsepower. The answer to question 4 was A, 135 horsepower. You know, although, Brett, we call the Winston Cup cars stock cars, there really is a difference between these cars and the normal passenger cars.
That's right, Benny, but many of the innovations from our Winston Cup cars have carried over to the passenger cars.
Such as shoulder restraints, rear view mirrors, extra bracing in the doors to protect the driver from side impact, and better, safer tires. But probably racing's biggest influence in the past few years has been in the area of aerodynamics.
We use the aerodynamics of our Quaker State Buick to help the handling and make the car run faster. On a passenger car, aerodynamics also helps the handling, but also helps the fuel economy.
Aerodynamics. We get many questions about that subject. So, Brett, let's give the folks at home another chance to test their knowledge. This is Racing Tough Challenge, question number 5.
The purpose of a rear spoiler on the Quaker State Buick is A. Slow the car and hold the rear end down at high speeds.
Or B, improve fuel economy on the super speedways.
Or C. For appearances only.
To continue with aerodynamics, let's look at the front end where we find the air dam. Question 6 is, what is the purpose of the air dam?
A. Provide a stronger front end in case of an accident on the speedway.
B, allows the car to cut through the wind in a more efficient manner.
Or C, Benny, allow more air to flow into the car to keep the driver cool.
To get the answer to question 5, we'll go to the NASCAR garage area and have Brett explain.
The rear spoiler on our Quaker State Buick is a very important handling tool. It is used to aerodynamically balance the car for the different racetracks that we run at. For instance, at Daytona or Talladega, we would run a very low angle on the rear spoiler, about 25 degrees. That way the car will obtain as much possible straightaway speed with the right amount of downforce for handling in the corners. But at a short track like Martinsville or Bristol, we would run a much steeper angle, about 60 degrees of angle, where top speed is not as important as handling. And with that steep of an angle on the rear spoiler, maximum amount of downforce is achieved.
So folks, if you answered A, you're correct.
Okay, for the answer to question number 6, let's go to Benny with the Quaker State Buick.
All right, Brett, you just explained the rear spoiler and how it keeps downforce on the rear wheels and also increases or decreases drag. How do they keep the front end on the ground? With the front air dam. That's this piece. And you see how close it is to the ground? Any air that goes under the front of the car wants to lift the front end off the ground. So they run the air dam as close as they can to keep the air from under and keep the car in balance. So folks, if you answered question 6 with B, lets the car cut through the wind more efficiently, you're correct.
Well, Benny, we can change the aerodynamics based upon the situation. For example, race setup versus qualifying setup. To set up a car for qualifying, the Quaker State crew makes a number of adjustments, but my crew chief, Larry McReynolds, will tell us how.
Larry, we hear the term race setup and a qualifying setup. For instance, what are we talking about by a qualifying setup?
Well, probably the two biggest things we do for qualifying that we don't do for the race is in the race we'll run all the front end open to let all the air we can through it to help cool the motor for a long 500-mile condition. For qualifying, all we're looking for is just one lap, so we'll take tape and put it across the front end to keep air from going through the front end, which will make the car run faster on the straightaway, and we're not concerned with keeping the motor cool for one lap. Second thing we'll do is for qualifying, we'll lay the spoiler back just as much as we can to make it run faster on the straightaways. But in race conditions, we can't do that because other cars are around him and upset the aerodynamics of it, so we have to put the spoiler up more to make him more secure for a long 500-mile race.
What about the engine? Do you do anything different in the engine for qualifying than you would for the race?
A lot of times we'll lean the motor out a little bit with carburetor jets. Again, all we're looking for is just making sure it don't blow up for that one lap. And we'll also a lot of times kick 2 or 3 degrees of timing in it just to make it get that extra little bit of power for that one lap.
You can't do that in the race because that would get the cylinder too hot over an extended run. Is that correct?
Exactly. You got to run for 3.5, 4 hours some of these races, and you know, you got to be there at the end, and you might run fast for a few laps if you do some of these things I've talked about for the race, but you won't be there at the end.
After qualifying, the teams have to make the transition from a qualifying setup back to a race setup. And Brett, sometimes they've got to put it together for 600 miles.
That's right, Benny. And that's where the Quaker State crew really shows how tough they are. Each crew member has his own job, own responsibility, and we have to put it all together as a team. Our team owner, Kenny Bernstein, is going to tell us more about that.
Well, the first thing you got to have is ability with anybody that works at the place. Without ability, then you can't go forward at all, and then you hope that you get the right chemistry amongst the 18 or 19 people that you have. That's a very difficult thing all the time. Of course, what makes chemistry work is winning races. When you win, all the bad stuff seems to go away pretty quick, and when you're losing and you're having trouble, then all the bad stuff comes out in a hurry. But we look at each employee very hard at their abilities. We try to understand their personalities as much as we can, and then we basically put them to work and with the understanding that obviously you've got to be able to do the job and get along at the same time. And basically, like I said, if you're having a good season or if you're running good and up front and you're a competitive race team, it makes that life a lot easier. But it's quite a juggling act for everybody to get everybody going in the right direction sometimes. But we're fortunate. We got a great group of guys with the Quaker State team this year. They all get along well. Even though we haven't done as well as all of us would like to do at the start of the season, we've been in there and we're going to be good before it's over with.
Brett, earlier we talked about the handling of a car, and I asked how we fix it. Now would be a good chance to explain, and it's another chance to test the fans' knowledge. Question 7 on the Racing Tough Challenge. So, Brett, question 7, what is wedge? A, the way the spoiler angle is adjusted. B, the engine. Or C, the adjustment of weight in the suspension to assist handling.
Question 8 also deals with handling. What is tire stagger? A, the way the wheels are adjusted with weights. B, the tire compounds. Or C, Benny, the size of the tires in relation to the other tires. For the answer to these questions, let's go back to the King Racing shop.
Brett, it seems like every time a car makes a pit stop in a Winston Cup race, the crew changes the wedge. What are they talking about by changing the wedge?
Well, Benny, when we're talking about a wedge change in the car, we're actually talking about weight distribution. Changing the weight distribution to change the characteristics of the handling of the car on the racetrack. One of the real popular ways to do it is to, of course, adjust on the jack screw. The jack screw is attached to the chassis through the plate, which then, of course, is attached to the coil spring. And by doing that, we can turn the jack screw, which will load the spring, or we can turn it the other way and unload the spring, which will, again, change the weight distribution of the car.
So, folks, the answer to question 7 is C, the adjustment of weight in the suspension to assist handling. Now, for question 8, let's go back to the garage area with tire specialist on the Quaker State team, John Wolf. We've talked about changing the chassis with a wrench, turning the bolts. There's another way of changing the chassis, that's with tire stagger. Explain what tire stagger is.
Well, Benny, tire stagger is nothing more than the difference from the outside tire circumference compared to the inside tire circumference. It's a very important tool for adjusting the car throughout the day at a race event. Now, stagger is so important that we will have a tire specialist on our team just to take care of the tires. We mount up so many sets of tires for these long events that someone has to be on top of those tires all day long, measuring them and keeping track of the air pressure so that he can adjust his tire stagger in each set of tires to the conditions as they change on the racetrack, as I will relay to the crew chief throughout the day.
And your tire specialist is standing by. Why don't we just let him go to work and you explain what he's doing?
Okay, prior to an event, we'll mount up probably 10 or 12 sets of tires, and John Wolf, our tire specialist for the Quaker State Buick race team, will measure every single tire, make sure the air pressure is correct, and measure every tire and log it in his book. And then as we go ahead and practice and start adjusting the car to the racetrack, we will relay to him the sizes and the sets of tires that we want, whether it be 1.5 inches of stagger in the front and 1 inch in the rear, or maybe 1/2 inch in the rear and 1 inch in the front. He is responsible for giving us the sets of tires that we will need to make the Quaker State Buick run as fast as possible.
So, folks, the answer to question 8 is C, one tire size in relation to the other tires, as we've just seen. You know, there really is a lot more to making a race car work than meets the eye. Brett, you've got a degree in mechanical engineering, but I'm sure you continue to learn as you've made the transition from modified to Grand National and finally the Winston Cup.
That's exactly right, Benny. You know, one thing I've learned is that these tracks are built totally different. Each track has its own sweet spot, that spot that really makes the car handle well and handle very easily. In a few minutes, we're going to show these fans just what I'm talking about as we search for that sweet spot at Dover.
Back in 1982, I was the first driver to qualify at over 200 miles an hour. That was at Talladega, Alabama. And aerodynamics was very important at 200 miles an hour. And Brett, they're still very important. Aerodynamics is important. Let's talk a little bit about the role it plays in drafting at Daytona and Talladega.
That's right, Benny. It's even more important today. With the restrictor plate motors that we have and the loss of horsepower that we've seen, drafting is the only way to keep up in those tight packs of cars. And in those tight packs of cars, we have a lot of dead air and turbulent air.
Okay, let's look at the graphic illustration that shows how airflow goes across the car and dead air can be created. Brett, as a car goes along by itself, the wind helps push the car down.
Exactly. We can see the air going over the front of the car, holding the nose and the front part of the car down. The air adheres to the body, goes up over the roof to the rear spoiler, and holds the back of the car down, creating a very stable situation.
But then another car comes up behind that car and creates some serious problems.
Well, it certainly does. You know, both cars now have seen a difference in aerodynamic characteristics. The front car sees air come off its rear spoiler, loosening the car up, where the car behind sees air come off the front of his car, making his car much tighter and pushy.
So what would you want to do if maybe your car is not handling exactly right and you would maybe not want to be in front or in the rear?
Well, this is one of the things that we do look for in practice. Maybe our car wants to lead a pack of cars because it is a tight race car. A little air off the rear spoiler helps it make it neutral. Or vice versa. You might have a loose car. You might need to follow somebody instead of lead a pack.
Okay, aerodynamics is important, but horsepower is also important to make those cars run 200 miles an hour. We talked about horsepower earlier and how much the Quaker State Buick produces. There's a device that engine builders use to measure that horsepower. That's question 9 on the Racing Tough Challenge. The device used to measure an engine horsepower is A, a dyno or dynamometer, B, the torque to weight ratio, or C, a tachometer. For the answer to this, let's look at another tough fact with Dr. Jerry Punch.
For years, many of you race fans have heard us talk to crew chiefs and engine builders about engine performance. They tell us, well, on the dyno it showed us this, and in this run on the dyno it showed this. Well, many of you say, well, what's a dyno? Well, dyno is short for dynamometer. It's this monstrosity I'm standing beside here. Now, a dynamometer actually allows you to take an engine, this being the basic engine from a race car, a Winston Cup car, into a room away from the race car and hook it up to all sorts of sensoring wires. And we'll take, here's the carburetor. Air under atmospheric pressure with carefully measured temperature comes through the carburetor and the engine is run by a technician. Everything is monitored, every single parameter. For example, here, exhaust gas temperatures are monitored from each individual header pipe. Now, the heart and soul of the dynamometer actually is this little blue box here in the back. This allows, by compressed water, a conversion of torque from the engine into a horsepower reading. This interpretation then is channeled outside the room to a series of computers and gauges and printout devices. A technician will actually stand here at this panel and as he runs the dynamometer, monitor every single parameter, volts, power torque conversions, RPM, airflow, all of which is fed into a computer display and then into a printout machine.
For question 9, the correct answer is A. The dynamometer is used to measure horsepower. Now, we found out what it takes to make a great team and how you prepare a car to run a race. Let's put that horsepower to use and go to the races. Brett, we're going to ride with you at the Monster Mile, Dover International Raceway, Dover, Delaware.
And what a monster mile it is. We're going to take the fans for a ride with us at Dover and show them just how hard we work to get the Quaker State Buick in competitive trim and try to get it into victory lane.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
Well, Benny, that's really the green flag of emotions in a Winston Cup race for a driver.
Always concerned that the engine will not be able to fire.
Well, it certainly is, and once it does, it's getting down to business. It's time to go racing.
What's your emotions now? Just as you roll off pit road, what are you thinking about?
Well, we're very concerned about, what's ahead, the 500 laps here at Dover and all the things that's going to happen, especially at the start of the race.
All right, you're ready to start. The green flag is out. What gear are you in?
Well, right here, Benny, we're in second gear, getting ready to hear that signal that the green flag has been thrown. As we come up through second gear, we shift into third, picking up more and more speed down the front straightaway, and eventually high gear as we fall off into the first corner.
Go to the in-car camera. What's all the dust on the racetrack, Bet?
Well, Benny, that's where the infield traffic has been allowed to go across the racetrack and track some dirt and debris across the speedway.
Ooh, Kawicki almost lost it there. Did it scare you a little bit?
Well, definitely a concern. You know, the track's awful dusty and dirty and very slick, and guys are sliding around an awful lot at this point in time.
You've made a lap. Now, does the car feel okay? Do you think you've got a shot?
Well, you know, right now, again, we're trying to sort this thing out, trying to figure out what we've got compared to the rest of the competitors. You know, we're charging hard. The days of letting things kind of come and go and during the race have gone. We've got to run hard all day.
We saw Dale Earnhardt almost lose it. Did you back off just a little bit to make sure he was headed under control?
Well, certainly. Anytime you see a car bobble as much as Dale's did there, you have to take caution.
There's Diane working the computer in the pits.
And, of course, here's Dale Earnhardt with his troubles throughout the day.
And the caution flag is out.
I told Wolfie to make sure, trying to get that rear stagger up, close both ends up, and especially rear. From up here, it definitely looks like the right rear tire. Brad, you reckon just in case we don't get it enough with that, we ought to about a round and a half of bite in it? It needs to be staggered, Larry. It needs to be staggered. Okay, Wolfie, you got us covered, don't you? 4. All right, 4 tires. 4 tires. Get with your leaders.
Stagger. They keep talking about stagger. What are you talking about, Brett?
Well, as the car was coming off the corner, the car was extremely loose, and adjusting or reducing the rear stagger would have fixed that problem. We saw Larry McReynolds with a signboard up, signaling to me where our pit is exactly located. As you can see, it looks like a traffic jam in downtown New York City here, coming down on the pit road. Very hard to find your pit.
How do you find your pit?
Well, that signboard man is a very important job for him to get out there far enough so that I can see where to pull in.
Changing the right side on the car, there's a fellow over taking the lug nuts off the left side. As the car goes down on the right side, there's the tire that came off the right.
Now, my signal to go will be when the jack is falling, and there we go. There's a Quaker State Buick leaving pit road. As soon as that jack falls, it's time for me to get back to business and get out on the racetrack, fall in line with the rest of the cars on the apron.
Wolfie, you feel okay with what we put on there? Well, what we put on was about 3/8 less than what we just went out there with to start with.
Okay, Brett, they've changed the stagger. Now, here's what we're talking about, measuring the outside dimension of the tire.
Exactly. Checking the tire sizes, make sure what we put on is what we're going to need for the next run, and 3/8 of an inch less should tighten the car up.
Pace car's off. Green flag, green flag.
Larry McReynolds said green flag. Does he tell you that every time, Brett?
Exactly, Benny. As you can tell, I could not see the starter to know when the race was restarted. His signal to me is to tell me, go at it, go back racing, try to get as many cars past as you can. Here we see we passing a lap car on the outside as we come up out of the second turn, trying to jockey for a better position. We're way back in the pack. It's time to try to get to the front.
All right, now you've been through one corner, you're going through your second corner. You've made some changes on the pit stop. Obviously, it didn't help that much.
No, it really didn't, Benny. As we could see, I'm trying to make a move on these guys, but just not gaining ground like we ought to. Hopefully, we could make a better change on the next pit stop.
As we watch Schrader and Ernie Irvin go down the back straightaway, crash in the second corner. Michael Waltrip gets hit by Alan Kawicki.
Going down toward the bottom of the racetrack. Leader had taken the caution. It fell behind him.
As Brett Bodine motions to the drivers behind him that he's slowing down, you know that these guys crash. When they take them back to the shop, how do they fix them? Brett Bodine is going to explain.
Brett, car hits the wall. We interview the driver. We say, how bad is the damage? He says, well, we'll probably have to put a new front clip on it. What's he talking about?
Well, the driver's referring to a frame section, a part of the frame, the race car. And basically, the race car has 3 sections to it. We have a front clip, the midsection, and a rear clip. When he's speaking of replacing the front clip, actually the car would be replaced from about this area right here forward. All of the front suspension mounting points, and of course the motor mounts and all that would be replaced because of damage.
All right, Brett, we talked about the front. Is the rear the same?
Well, Benny, the rear clip starts right here at the back of the side rail, but the rear clip has several sections that we can replace. As we saw at Bristol when we backed in the wall, we only replaced from here back.
So the damage was not that severe, Bristol?
Exactly. The car only needed to be replaced from about the rear firewall and the fuel cell area.
Back to Dover. As the race wears on, it's wearing the driver out, isn't it, Brett?
Sure is, Benny. As you can see it by this shot here that, you know, the driver goes through a lot of G-forces, a lot of forces on the driver. We've got a little headrest up there by my head. Shot of the pedal work going on. Lightly on the brake, squeezing the gas pedal down, finally getting all the throttle as we go down the straightaway, letting off for the corner. We see the foot come back. Hard back on the brakes to get down in the corner at Dover.
We see your left foot sitting on top of the brake. Does it sit there most all day?
It really does, Benny. We put a heavy enough return spring on the brake pedal that it can hold the weight of my foot without dragging the brakes. It's just a little easier and a little faster if trouble were to come up. My foot's already on the brake pedal to make a move to slow the car down.
All right, now let's look at the gauges. The one on the right is a fuel pressure gauge, about 7 pounds. Is that normal?
Certainly is. We see it fluctuating a little bit. That's very, very normal.
Water temperature gauge, 200. Is that normal?
Yeah, that's where we'd exactly like to see it. Nothing higher, nothing lower.
Oil pressure gauge, 80 pounds, a little bit over at top RPM. Is that normal?
Exactly. That's where we like to see our engines operating on the oil pressure. Anything lower could cause a problem.
Oil temperature about 200 degrees.
Right in the realm of acceptability. You know, these cars go through a lot throughout a 500-mile race, and those gauges are telling me that everything's still okay under the hood.
Now we see the gas man putting on the gloves. We see the headgear and fireproof clothing. You would think that gasoline in a race car would be the most dangerous thing in the world, but really and truly it isn't. You know, they have the gas tanks in a race car is one of the safest things there is. Brett Bodine is going to explain the gas tank. Okay, Brett, explain to me about a gas tank in a race car.
Well, Benny, we actually don't have a gas tank. We have what we call a fuel cell. Now, that fuel cell is consisted of a couple different parts. This is the inner bladder, the rubber part of the fuel cell, which is 22 gallons. And inside of that, we see foam rubber, which keeps the gas from sloshing around while we make corners on the racetrack. That rubber bladder is housed in a steel container, just an outside shell for protection. Now, in case of a wreck, if this shell was to get crushed, this rubber bladder, because it is rubber, would not get a puncture so easily and can change its shape and still contain the fuel. Now, over here, we have a complete assembled fuel cell with the check valve on the top.
Which is this part. Now, what does this do?
Well, this part here, in case the car should get on its top or roll over like that, these two steel balls right here will seal off the fuel from running out on the racetrack or possibly causing a fire.
So as you can see, the gas tank, one of the safest pieces in a race car, isn't it, Brett?
It certainly is, Benny. As we exit the pit area, we see the bumper cam shot back at Dick Trickle's car, and we're going to blend up on the racetrack over here. Here we are for a restart.
Third gear, shifting in the high. And I see your brother up front. Is that a different car than the rest, or is that just another race car when you see your brother, Jeff?
Well, Benny, we're paid professionals to go out and do a job and try to win a race. I have to race everybody else just as hard as the next guy, and Jeff, to me, on the racetrack is just another one of the guys on the racetrack I'm trying to beat.
Coming up behind Darrell Waltrip, exiting the corner. The car hasn't been that good all day, has it, Brett?
No, it really hasn't, Benny. We fought the car all day, trying to make it handle better and better throughout the day, just unable to get that combination to get you to the front.
You got 75 laps to go. We can't go the distance.
75 laps. Feels like you've been on the racetrack for 1,000 laps.
Certainly has, Benny. You know, 75 laps getting down close to the end, feeling a lot of fatigue inside the car.
And it looks like, what's the thing in the helmet, the black thing beside your helmet?
That's a headrest that I use tracks like Dover, very long, very tiresome on the driver, to help support my head so that my neck and upper back doesn't give out through the day. As you can see, a lot of G-forces on the driver as you go through the corner, and throughout the day it just wear you down.
Well, that seat holds you in the car very well, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It's been a great safety item.
This is the final lap of the 500-mile race at Dover, and we've had the opportunity to see the Quaker State team in action, making the changes it takes to try to bring home a win. Changes in tire stagger, changes in chassis setup, working as a team to win the battle in the pits.
It's a tough challenge to go the distance, but once again, Brett and the team has met the challenge. Each race is a learning experience, and the team will take what it learned today to continue its quest for a Winston Cup championship.
Brett, what a tough day you had at Dover. And I understand those days, they are tough. But the guys worked hard all day. You worked hard all day. We certainly enjoyed riding with you, and you pure passed the racing challenge at Dover. How about the racing challenge you took today? Did you learn anything?
Well, I definitely learned some things, Benny. But more importantly, I hope the fans did. I hope they became more informed about Winston Cup racing so that they can be more into it at home watching it on TV or enjoy the races more in person. If you answered 9 questions correctly, you would be a Quaker State Racing Tough Champion. 7 or 8 correct answers would put you in line to be a championship contender.
5 or 6 correct answers tells me you've been watching and listening and will be a challenger in the future. Less than 5 right? Well, everybody's got to start someplace, and you've got a shot to be this year's Racing Tough Challenge Rookie of the Year. Thanks for taking the challenge.
Call up your friends and challenge them to take the Quaker State Racing Tough Challenge.
And be watching for our next ESPN broadcast of the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. We hope what you've learned today will help you enjoy racing even more.
The Quaker State King Racing Buick, winner of the 1989 Die Hard Award for the most tough NASCAR mile, is winning again in 1990 as Brett Bodine takes first in the first Union 400. It takes a tough oil to keep a car running this tough, and it takes a tough driver to step right in, step on it, and win. But number 26 is one tough car. Brett Bodine is one tough driver, and Quaker State is one tough motor oil.